What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Avernum 2 Crystal Souls, continuing, of course, both the first Avernum trilogy, but also my own round through those games to prepare for the launch of Avernum 4, or the remake of Avernum 4, that is supposed to be coming out later this year. Obviously, I've already covered the first game, so if you want to go back and watch that review, feel free, and you may want to, because I am going to be, by default, spoiling a little bit of that first game, because the endings of that one sort of lead directly into this one, so, know that. But what I will say, first impressions wise, obviously, is that a lot of people have told me that basically all of the Avernum games have a lot of similar mechanics and they feel very similar to play. And while I suppose that is certainly true, like a lot of the progression systems are essentially exactly the same here, what I am finding interesting is the subtle differences. So for starters, when you're making your party this time around, you can play as the Slith Zerakai or the Nephilim, which are the lizard and cat races, respectively, which have their own bonuses. Though I will say, like in so many games, just playing as humans have gigantic bonuses as well in the form of extra traits every few levels. Whereas the Slith make exceptional warriors, or specifically with pole weapons, which they get a bonus to. And then the Nephilim cat race get bonuses to initiative, basically. So stuff like that, but also more impactful things like the way the game is actually presented. If you watch my review of Avernum 1, what I noted was that a lot of the structure of how the game works was very reminiscent of like old school tabletop stuff, where you're given a sort of more ambiguous goal and pretty much given free rein in terms of how you approach that. Whereas the story here is much more structured, at least at the beginning. Like there's a very clear sort of route through what you have to do, and the game literally blocks you off from other areas until you do those things. And so I found then that while certainly a lot of this is very similar, it is different in some big ways that are important to me, at least. But backing it up a little bit, when it comes to getting this game running, as I've mentioned, this is a remake of a remake, and so while it will likely start on modern machines, you may run into problems, specifically if you're running like a larger monitor size than this game was really designed for, particularly 4K monitors, which I fully expected because I had that same problem with the first game. But what I found very strange was that I could not fix it the same way here that I did with the first one as well. And that is primarily because the game will not scale the main sort of playable game that you're firing up to a 4K monitor. I just couldn't get it to work, despite going into like the compatibility settings and trying to force it to scale on its own that way. What I ultimately wound up having to do was a combination of that and also just forcing the game down to 1080, despite it not being a native resolution. So honestly, not really a big deal at all. I just thought it was strange that I had to solve that problem differently here than I did with that original title. From there though, let's talk story. So the Avernum series puts you in the underground world of Avernum, which is a hundreds upon hundreds of miles worth of cave system that lies below the surface of this world. In the previous game, the sort of main ending for it, which is the big spoiler by the way, results in the assassination of the Emperor that sent you down here to begin with, or it leads the Empire that sent you down here. As a result of that, the Empire is sort of counterattacking into Avernum. Now the catch here is they cannot move massive amounts of troops into Avernum. They simply lack the resources to do that, at least very quickly, because the portals that they send people to Avernum through are limited by their very nature, and as a result of that, the people in Avernum have been successfully holding them off in the meantime. That is, until they started committing more troops to this effort, but also mysterious barriers popped up all throughout the cave system that nobody seems to be responsible for, which leads into the rest of the story. So in the original game, you could find corpses of humanoids that were not familiar to you. They were almost alien in nature, and it seems those guys are making a comeback here because you get pretty much accosted by one at one point, which feeds into the story. And just from that, I would say that this story seems to be much more structured than the first games as well. Now, luckily, thanks to my experience with that first game, I am having a much easier time this time around, not least of which, though, because the overworld map is pretty much the same. I'm about to go into a part that is brand new to this game, mind you, but the bulk of it seems to be the same map by and large, which makes getting around much easier because I kind of already know where I'm going. But the other side of that is also the difficulty, so I imagine at least a little bit of this is from the fact that clearing Torment the first time around gave me a pretty good idea of what to expect here in terms of combat. But I did also notice that things here just seem to have dramatically less health and are a bit easier to tackle, at least here at the beginning. I imagine that will ramp up relatively soon as I start moving through the rest of it, as I'm kind of moving out of the big starter area at this point. But it definitely seems like this game is aimed more at easing you into the entire experience than the initial title. Now, everything else, I will say, very familiar at this point. Pretty much all the same stuff. Progression largely works the same way. You get attributes and trait points and skill points every so often, attribute points and skill points every level. Skill points determine how good you are with various things like melee weapons or various types of magic, which allows you to wear heavier armor as a fighter type who can then deal with the huge hits to their accuracy that comes from wearing that armor simply by overcoming it through their skills, whereas mages can't wear armor and cast their spells past a certain point, and the usual stuff. And then all the regular skills like cave lore, which effectively allows you to avoid combat encounters or find secret paths, tool use, which is just lockpicking. So I kind of know what's going on here, and I'll be curious to see then if any of this actually winds up feeling different, because even things like the trainers, which teach you your spells and whatnot, seem to work pretty much identically here. But putting all of that together, ultimately, I'm not really expecting anything revolutionary here in terms of advancements, as obviously it's just not that kind of progression, given that Spiderweb Software's the developer is effectively one person. But what I am deeply interested in, however, is the story and where that is going, because if you watch that initial review, I was very, very into the story and how all the writing and stuff here came together. So while there are some subtle improvements in terms of gameplay systems, etc., what I'm really interested here is just how the story and world winds up advancing. To that end, obviously I'm in the process of reviewing this one. I don't know the exact timing on that because there's a not insubstantial chance my review of this, or my process of reviewing it I should say, will wind up getting interrupted. So it's hard to give an exact estimate here. The first game took me about 70 hours total, but given that I already know the map here and the combat systems and everything else, so I don't have to get to grips with all of that, I doubt it will take me quite as long. But at the moment, kind of hard to put an exact timing on it. But hopefully no longer than a week or two. But with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed this impressions video. If you did, obviously, like, comment, subscribe, stick around for the full review, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.